Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Atrainability Radio, where I speak with Alexandra Adams about her experiences, which I think are unique, as a deafblind medical student and now junior doctor. In this episode of Atrainability Radio, I'm going to speak with Alexandra. We'll talk about what in particular has been, I think, beneficial to her progression through the training, bearing in mind her particular disabilities. And I think it's an absolutely wonderful episode, and I'm sure we'll gain much more from it. What I'm trying to get out of these is the stories from initially all of you TEDx NHS 2019 speakers about what we can help other people across health and social care to learn and to grab and to think, gosh, that could apply to me, and yes, that's a difference that I could make. I leave the sort of intense theory to other people, and I figure, and it sounds a bit steady, but I'm kind of a simple guy, and what I'd rather do is what can I do differently, or what can I help somebody else do either differently, or what we don't focus on is do more of that they're already doing, and maybe they don't realize. This thing about disability then, you said people make assumptions, and that's fascinating that it's often the senior clinicians. So the implication then is the juniors don't have that problem, or what would you say? I
mean, I have faced some discrimination from juniors, but on the whole, most of it does come from my senior colleagues. Now, I wonder whether that's because obviously when they were going through their training, whether they were sort of more used to the traditional setup of medicine back in the day, when the stereotypes, the outdated stereotypes that we have now were the perfect norm back then. And so maybe for those who are more senior and more older in the profession, they are more used to the sort of the very traditional sort of the images, the set images behind being a doctor, being a nurse and so on. And they're not so flexible in being able to adapt to new situations and new people coming into the field. And so I think that's the problem. Now, there are the sort of a small handful of people out there who are just, plain old negative, and you're going to get people like that in anywhere you go. But I think, like I said, on the whole, I just think it's not malicious. It's just this whole ignorance and just misunderstanding of disability. And actually, I was speaking about this with someone else the other day again, that actually, the only reason why disability is still seen as a taboo, not just in healthcare, but in society in general, is because we are so scared to say the wrong things that we don't talk about it at all. And then it becomes, it never becomes the hot topic or the topic of conversation. And so the less we talk about it, the more sort of out of the norm it becomes. And so that's why it was amazing listening to all the TEDx NHS speakers, because they were bringing these topics to the stage that otherwise wouldn't have been discussed. And so then the audience could then go away and say, oh, hey, I listened to this speaker talk about this sort of sometimes very sensitive and emotional and controversial topics, and the more people talk about it, the less kind of scary it is to bring it into everyday conversation.
Yes, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I've always had a problem of dealing with bereavement and death, for instance, as having lost my parents when I was, a grown adult, but way before I was ready for them to go. And I was never brought up to really deal with it. And so for many years, it's been kind of a taboo subject. Now I'm in my very late 60s, and I've got friends like yesterday, we've got a friend who's only got a matter of weeks to live quite suddenly. And what do you do? And of course, what you do is you treat them as normally as you possibly can. And you try to look at the positives and offer support as much as you can.
Absolutely. And sometimes actually just talking about these things is, it's easier said than done, but actually it makes the whole sort of situation around it more comfortable in the end. And I say that obviously, from wanting to go into palliative medicine. It's death and dying is a very taboo subject that, just like disability and many other things.
So why is that in particular a subject which interests you then, Alexandra?
I think with palliative medicine, for a start, it's something that's realistic. It's a field that I can go into with a visual and hearing impairment. I mean, this is something that I always say to other people who, for instance, have seen my interviews on TV. The first thing they say, how can she even be a surgeon? Well, obviously, I'm not going to become a neurosurgeon or a cardiothoracic surgeon because it's just not realistic. I mean, yes, there might be equipment out there that could help me, but really, I want to make my life as easy as possible and the lives of patients as easy as possible. And with palliative medicine, I mean, I went into medicine because I care very much about the people. You have some doctors who are very, straight science-minded and less about communicating with other people. Mm-hmm. And then you have the other extreme where, like someone like myself who actually, yes, okay, science and interlinking everything is great. It's wonderful. But actually I'm very focused on the psychosocial factors in human beings. And I just love that palliative medicine, particularly in this day of age, is less about the tick boxes. It's less about the sort of the statistics, and it's more about just sitting down with that patient and treating them as a human being and working with them and their families and just talking about stuff. I mean, yes, okay, there's going to be the invasive things and, the pain control and stuff like that, but there's just so much more to it. And I guess I always like to try and go into something that I can apply empathy to. Now, obviously, I've spoken a lot about this, and I spoke about this in my TED talk a little bit as well. But being a patient, I've been in hospital for a year and a half. I had 20 stomach surgeries, and that was just a weird year and a half, as a teenager. And I've also been in intensive care 16 times to date, or since medical school, actually. And so I've kind of experienced I don't remember it at the time, but sort of the traumas, the after effect of, oh my goodness, I kind of was near the edge or the brink, if you like, and how it affected not necessarily me, but the people around me. So, for instance, families of patients who are in palliative care, how are they dealing with things? Actually, I had 3 family members who were all treated by the same hospice, and they all died in the same sort of year. And in fact, I think it was over like a 4-month time frame. So a really small space of time. But, to see how the hospice staff and the doctors in palliative medicine treated them, it was enlightening. But my grandma, she had COPD, so a chronic condition of the lungs, which only gets worse. And I was quite oblivious to the fact that it was going to be managed with palliative intent, because for some reason I thought that palliative medicine was just for people with cancers. But that's not true. It's for people who have got motor neuron diseases, heart failures, lung diseases, all sorts. And my grandma was under the hospice team, and she was in and out of hospital with recurrent chest infections. She only had one dying wish, and that one dying wish was, I do not want to die in hospital. Now, some patients might want to die in hospital, they might want to die in a hospice, they might want to die at home. But to meet that one dying wish I just think is so simple, but so important for the patient and their family. And unfortunately, without going into too much detail, we went in one morning to see my grandma, and she was sat out in the chair, but she was slumped on her table, her little trolley by the bed. And no one was really kind of aware of this, none of the staff. And with COPD, you cannot put the oxygen up on the wall past 1, because in a COPD patient, they cannot get rid of the carbon dioxide so well. And instead, it kind of builds up in your body, and then you turn acidotic and shuts down all your organs. And the oxygen number on the oxygen meter on the wall was 8. So someone at some point had put it up. We don't know who. But essentially, my grandma was already in this dying process. So she was completely out of it. She was turning acidotic within, the minutes, and she was gone all really puffy and yellow, and they weren't able to do anything. It was irreversible. Right. And obviously we raised the alarm, but we couldn't get her to the hospice. We couldn't even get her into a side room or anything. She literally just had the only dignity she had were the curtains around the bed, and she was on a 6-bed bay, and 4 of the other patients in that bay had dementia, and at this point they were calling out and screaming and banging the cabinets, and it was just so distressing, and I just thought this isn't the way anybody would want to spend their last moments. And it just made me, I guess at the time we were all in shock, and I think I was the only one who didn't show my emotion in the sense I was like, I can't cry. I've got to, because seeing my mum in tears as well, that was the worst. And I just felt like I needed to be the strong one for everyone else, and that, my grandma would be like, you're going to become a doctor one day, and, you've got this. But no, it's just made me more determined and passionate to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else, really. Yes. So I always like to apply a personal story to it. I think it makes it so much more significant. I
totally agree. Just out of, and that's a very powerful story, just out of curiosity, how did the unit deal with the aftermath, in fact, of investigating, or did they? No,
it wasn't dealt with at all. And in fact, if I was, whatever I was, if I was working on that ward and a patient had just died and the family were there kind of not knowing what to do, I would have at least gone up to him and said, do you want a hug, or do you want a cup of tea? Is there anything I can do? Literally no one came up to us. We just left. We said our goodbyes and we left. And actually to this day, my grandpa doesn't know the real reason for her death. So he thinks that, we just withdrew treatment and let her die, because I think if he found out that actually it was a medical error that, killed my grandma, I just think it would break him. It would absolutely break him. And he had Guillain-Barré and various other diseases as well. So he's not in the best of health. And he was his full-time carer. He's 84. And it breaks my heart to see them go through that. And it's difficult. And actually, I ended up on that ward a year later as a medical student on the respiratory ward, and it was quite strange, because
I bet it was.
Obviously, having to take histories off of patients in the ward round, and then I was getting these flashbacks almost, and thinking, my grandma was in this bed, and this is where she died. But obviously I didn't tell anyone, but I did have to step back for a moment and just, go and breathe and then get back to it. So yeah,
I'm just thinking about because it's very much the topic at the moment in things, lessons have been learned with these 2 incidents we mentioned earlier today. And you would just hope that somebody would have looked to try and avoid it happening again. That's all, Was it a miscommunication, a misunderstanding? Was it someone who wasn't trained? Or was it what you hear so often, which is somebody just not thinking? And I'm absolutely sure a lot of error goes because people are either rushing or, they just haven't switched on their conscious brain, if you like. I'm sorry, why did I do that? I don't know. I just wasn't thinking. But you'd like to hope that someone would have looked into it at least. And obviously I'm not advocating... You would... blame, unrealistically, but learning. And I think sometimes people are too quick to say, well, it's just one of those things, and which is exactly, of course, what was said to Martin Bromley with the loss of Elaine. It's just one of those things, which is such a shame.
I think, and you're totally right, and it's so difficult because I think particularly in any field, but, with the medical field, like you say, mistakes do happen. They happen every day, and it's okay because you can learn from them. At the end of the day, we're not superhumans. We're not robots. But the only way that, like you said, we can prevent these mistakes from happening again in the future is to at least own up to it and say, I'm really sorry. Maybe it was this that, led to the sort of the problems or whatnot. But in my situation, in my family situation, we had no idea who turned the oxygen up. We had no idea, who was, and I don't want to say at fault because, we're under enough strain as it is, and to point the finger at one person is not going to do anybody any favors, because ultimately it's a system. It's the whole system. And when it's like dominoes, when one person is sort of having a bad day because of this, and this, the pressure just goes on the other person, and then the other person, and the other person. It's a whole system thing. And that can't be changed overnight, sadly. It's something that we need to do collaboratively over time. And I guess that sounds really bad, because as a medical student you think, oh, this is really wrong. But when you're kind of stuck and they're kind of on the fence between being that relative and being, that healthcare professional, it's really difficult. You've got to weigh up, both sides of the story. So
you must, if you'll pardon the dreadful pun, you must see things in a different light. I'm guessing with added insight. I do apologise for that, but
that's fine.
you'll have it just seems so apposite, really. But you're, because you're breaking new ground and challenging the status quo. I expect you're probably able to think out of the box. Am I right in guessing that? And you're able to challenge the way we've always done it, which we come up against time and time again. Well, we've always done it this way. Well, okay, it doesn't mean you can't change or find a better way of doing it. Have you come across any examples like that?
I'm trying to think of.
Put you on the spot now.
Yeah. I mean, set examples. It's an everyday thing, and I think actually you're right. I am able to kind of look, or see beyond the bigger picture. But I think that is down to my personal life experiences of being a patient and just having these hurdles. And I guess it doesn't do me any favors sometimes, because I'm not very good at saying being completely for something or completely against. I'm always kind of in the middle and saying, on one hand this, on one hand that. So I'm a very long-winded person in general. I mean, when I was a patient for that year and a half, I just remember, and I was 16 at the time, so I was beginning to be inspired by, the whole kind of medicine thing and, could I be a doctor and all this? But I could just remember every single day there were these doctors that just come around on the ward. There was probably about 6 or 7 of them. And they'd stand at the invisible line at the end of my bed, and they'd just look down at my notes and mutter amongst themselves. But not once did they look at me and say, this is what's going on, or is everything all right? Do you understand? And they'd do their stuff, and then they'd move on to the next patient. And I would be sat there thinking, I have no... And bearing in mind, I'd had 20 stomach surgeries in that year. I mean, I remember I had 3 or 4 of them within 2 weeks. And I was going in and out of theatre. And I obviously wanted to know. I was terrified. And I was... Where I was in the hospital I was in at the time, at 16, you are classed as an adult. So I wasn't on the children's ward or anything. I was on a general surgical ward, but obviously most of these patients were patients who had dementia, and it just wasn't the right environment for me. But I can remember this one junior doctor that came back, and she said, "Are you okay?" Literally the 3 most important words the patient wants to hear. And I burst into tears, and I said, no. And I don't know whether I burst into tears because it was actually the first time that someone had actually asked me that question in a very long time. But no, she just smiled, and she got up, she drew the curtains round, and out of the blue, she just lifted up her blouse and she showed me a massive scar along her ribs. And she just said, "I know how you feel." And so she had gone through a similar sort of length of hospital admission to me at a similar age. And she had just taught me that, not only does she have empathy to give me, but she also taught me that I would have a ton of this empathy when I eventually get out of hospital and I become that sort of future doctor that I've always wanted to be. And actually, being a medical student, I find myself in these situations very similar to the one when I was a patient, where I'm in this massive crowd of doctors. And it's funny because, well, I say funny, but there's always seems to be this hierarchy when you're on the board, and you have the consultant at the very front, and then the reg, and then the juniors, and then the medical students are literally trailing at the very end. And sometimes it's even hard to fit into the tiny cubicle, and you're kind of perched underneath the curtain. But these doctors were doing exactly the same. So we were standing at the invisible line at the end of the bed, muttering through the notes and not really addressing the patient, and then moving on. And bearing in mind I was at the very back, and I couldn't see or hear much that was going on. And these doctors obviously have perfect vision and perfect hearing, and yet they were ignorant to the fact that this particular patient, there was just something not quite right about her. And I just got this instinct. And this goes back to me saying, I have less eyesight, but I have more insight. And we moved on to the next patient. And I know I'm going off topic here, but it's an important story.
No, you're not. It's fine.
But it was one of the times that I was discriminated against, and actually this particular consultant, he was mumbling, and I couldn't hear him, but I don't think anybody else could hear him either. And I thought, is anyone actually going to say anything? Is anyone actually grasping what he's on about? And so I was the one who kind of just put my hand up and said, look, I'm really, really sorry, but I've got hearing aids. I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit louder, please. And he kind of just looked at me in disgust and just carried on with his stuff. And he walked away. And as he did that, he said to one of his colleagues, and how do you expect an invalid like her to run the NHS? Now, obviously, I heard what he'd said, and I could have told him, I said, sorry, but I did hear what you just said there, but I chose not to. I chose to just go back to this patient who I thought, something's not quite right here. And so I let the others sort of head on, and at the end of the ward round, and I went back to this patient. I sat down, I said, introduced myself, and I said, are you okay? These 3 important words. And this patient burst into tears and said, no. And it turned out that this patient had recently been on intensive care and had been moved down onto the ward. And so she was frightened. She was probably a little bit traumatized by what had happened to her. And she saw, no one understands what I've gone through. And this was the point where I was able to get up and close the curtains and say, I know how you feel. I've been in intensive care many, many, many times. And I was able to say that, look, here I am. I'm where I'm, at the moment. I've been through this, but it will all be okay. And I didn't need any eyesight. I didn't need any hearing. I didn't need the blood test results in front of me or the CT scans. All I needed was to give this patient a little bit more time, 5 minutes of just sitting down, holding her hand and saying, it's going to be okay. And I think it's such an oversight these days. And it's so difficult, because I am sure that 99.9% of these doctors, these nurses, they went into the field originally because they really, really care for people, and they really would love to sit down and talk to their patients more and talk about the weather outside and so on. But really, realistically, and I've seen this as in the shoes of a medical student now, it's not possible, because we are so under strain with the system. It's all paperwork now. It's all admin. And so that's another example, a very long-winded example, mind, where, again, I'm sitting on the fence, not sort of for or against, what's going on here, because I can see from both perspectives. I've been that frustrated and upset patient who just so desperately wants someone just to come over and spend 2 extra minutes just to tell me what's going on. But then as a medical student, I know that realistically in the climate that we're in at the moment, it's not because people are ignorant or they just really don't want to, or they don't care about the jobs. It's because they're under strain too. And the environment is being made in such a way that we cannot be the doctors that we necessarily saw ourselves being at the beginning of medical school.
So it's dehumanizing for the medical staff, and it's dehumanizing for the patient. Just a thing that might interest you. Many years ago, we ran a course based around getting A&E teams to prepare themselves more effectively for when a patient comes in on a blue light. So it was form a team, have a briefing, who's going to do what, who have we got here, who's best able to do what job, then treat the patient, and we gave them just a thumbnail, little old lady broken a hip, that sort of thing. Somebody in a road traffic collision, somebody else with a burns or scalding. And so treat them. And then at the end of it, debrief. And we would help them to debrief each other. So how did we perform as a team? And what did we do well? And what could we do more of? And what could we do less of? And we didn't use mannequins. We used medical students in the bed to role play the patient. And of course, the beauty being that they can react, of course. And so at the end of it, I thanked one of them, who I remember was this lovely tall guy, and I just said to him, "Thanks so much for helping today." And he, by the way, a lovely tall guy who'd role played a little old lady with a broken neck or femur. I said to him, "You've been so helpful. Thanks. What just what have you got out of the day?" And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "The nurses treated me as a person, and the doctors treated me as a case."
Yes. And wow.
And we fed that back at the end of the course, and you can imagine, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. I think it's something I've noticed, I think, Alexandra, you've said a lot about doctors this and doctors that. I don't think I've heard you say much about nurses or other allied health professionals or whoever. And have you got any comments about them?
Yes. I mean, again, I think it's the same across the system, regardless of what specialty or what job role you're in. And I think, nurses, again, they go into the field because they really, really care. But I've got friends who are nurses who have gone into the field, and actually some of them have left because they can't do that caring role. It's become so much about, like I said earlier, the paperwork and the kind of the stipulations of things and the protocols. It's driven them away. And that's, I think, a real problem. But, I can give you another example of someone very important, actually, to me. Not just this doctor who came back and said, "Are you okay?" But one of the nurses, and you can imagine being on the same ward for that year and a half, you get to know them very, very well. And there was this one nurse, and she was lovely. And most of the time she was on night shift, and I had awful nights. I was on morphine, like a morphine pump and an epidural all year. I was in agony. And so she was constantly coming back and forth and, to my needs and whatnot. But I remember one time she brought in all her cuddly toys from her childhood, because I had a little teddy bear, and I thought, oh, this is so embarrassing. I'm 16, 17, and I've got a teddy bear, and all these obviously elderly patients around me thinking I must be a kid. Well, I was. But no, this nurse brought all her toys, and she said, "Oh, we'll put him there. We'll put, and dress the bed up." And I'm a very artistic person as well. And so on the days where I was able to sort of sit up, and because I was bedridden, but I was able to kind of just put myself up in bed, I did loads of drawings. And contrary to belief, the whole health and safety rules, she said, "Oh, let me help you put all your drawings up around the wall," and that's exactly what we did. And it was just little things like that. She tried everything to make the environment less clinical, less scary, yes, and just make it more sort of warm, kind-hearted for me, I guess. And actually, a few weeks ago, I lost touch with this nurse because once I came out, I was sort of straight into rehabilitation and then back to school to kind of start from the beginning, really, and do my A-levels to get to med school. But no, a few weeks ago, I was on Sky News, and then all of a sudden, I got back into the car, and my mum was driving me back to Cardiff, and I got this message in my friend request box on Facebook, and it was from a guy, and he said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind me getting in touch with you, but I am the son of the nurse who looked after you on this ward for that year and a half, and we've just seen you on the telly." And apparently she burst into tears, and she said, this has made my entire nursing career worthwhile. So it just goes to show that she really, really, really cared for her patients, and I saw that. I really saw it, and she was my favourite nurse. And actually, I'm very lucky because we're being reunited together actually over the Christmas holidays when I go home. So that will be lovely. I mean, it's been 8 years. So yeah,
you better prepare
it's
yourself.
Such a lovely moment.
Take a box of tissues. That's going to be a very emotional time.
we all care. And my mum was a physio, and she really, really cared about her patients. And I just think, and obviously my mum, this was 20 or so years ago for her. But I think it's like I said earlier, it's the system. It's a change in the strain of a system that's sadly changed people. Not in a way that they've wanted it to, but it's just meant that we aren't able to use our gift of just sitting down and being nice and kind and spending that time with poorly people, and instead we are just sat at a desk, trying to fight over the mountains of be it the system.
Yeah,
it's the system.
Yes, no, I quite agree with that.
And I think even over the last few years, it's got worse, because I remember starting medical school, it wasn't as bad as this, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. And now, obviously, I know more people working in the NHS. I hear more and more stories about people going in, quitting, and coming out and being broken by it. That's a real problem, because that's not what the NHS is for. It's not what it symbolises. It should symbolise, like it did 20, 30 years ago, of this embodiment of, thousands and thousands of staff that are just working together in this harmony of just wanting to make other people's lives better.
Well, just a small thing to say to you, because we run a lot of training courses for people in NHS and private healthcare providers, and there was a chap a year ago who turned out, I didn't realise what he was a senior orthopaedic consultant. One of the things I push is, compassion starts at right here with yourself. And a lot of high-performing professionals are very hard on themselves and very self-critical, and sometimes this spills out into criticism of others. And this guy, who was an older gentleman and all the rest of it, as he left the training room, he said, there's one thing, Trevor, you said today that has really struck with me, and I'm going to try and do it. And he said, you said, be kinder to yourself, and that's what I'm going to try and do. And I thought, well, that's really great. That's a little thing which would be hard. I guess you're going to run out of time soon, and I know you're busy. I just wondered if you could possibly go over that story of the little boy on the tube train again, Alexandra, if that's okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no problem. So I was actually coming away from one of the million conferences I was doing in this particular week, and I'd been thrashing through the London Underground on my cane, and, some people kind of, it's funny because they look down at the cane and they look at me, just to kind of see if I look like a blind person, I guess. I mean, they look back down at the cane and they go, oh, and then they move out of the way slowly. And then there's other people that kind of go, oh my gosh, and jump a mile, which is always great when you're in a rush because you have a seamless path to get through. And then you've got some people that just kind of just make assumptions, and they either kind of turn their nose up at you, or they literally grab your arm and think that they're helping you by taking you in one direction when in fact you want to go the other direction.
Yeah.
More than happy to do it yourself. But anyway, long story short, I ended up on the train back to on the tube train back to Paddington, because I was heading back to university, and I was sitting down minding my own business, and a little boy comes on the train with his mother, and turns out this little boy is called Tim, and he announces to his mum and the rest of a train carriage that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. And I kind of looked up and I smiled, But this mum, she kind of just said, but Tim, how are you going to hear all the poorly people? And I just watched him just sink into his seat with disappointment. And, it just struck a chord, because, I don't normally barge into conversations like that. I mean, it's not a thing you do on the London Underground. People don't really talk to each other.
Yeah, of course.
I couldn't help but just personally empathize with him, because, so many times throughout my childhood, and even now, people have told me I just can't do things because of my disability or whatever. And it's just because, it's not because I can't do it. It's because they just don't understand. They haven't taken that extra time to say, oh, hang on a minute, what can you do, or how can you do this? And, in terms of the general public, they kind of just see you for what you look like on the outside, and there you go, their mind's made up. So anyway, I kind of did something that I don't normally do, and I kind of leant into Tim, and I just pointed to his hearing aids and my hearing aids, and I said, you can do anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. This, and I'm pointing to the hearing aids, this is your superpower. And I think that's where I started the whole superpower kind of thing, really. But no, Tim smiled, and I don't know where Tim went, but I just hope that I was able to give him that very simple message just by pointing to my hearing aid to say, look, don't worry, you're not the only one, in this kind of rut, to be like, you can go off and do stuff. I mean, he probably didn't know that I was a medical student, because I was just one of those regular kind of London people just with my suitcase and my cane. But it just, I shared the story on Twitter, and it's unbelievable the amount of comments and positivity I've had from it. It's great. And actually, since then, I've had loads and loads of people message me on various social media platforms saying hi from Sydney, hi from Denmark, hi from Japan, everywhere, saying, oh, my granddaughter or my son or whoever's, got this disability, or, some of them don't even have any disabilities. They're just sort of, just wanting to become whatever they want to be when they're older, and had some sort of reservation about it. But after sort of hearing this story, either about me becoming the first deafblind medical student, or about Tim and my little conversation with Tim, they've just said, this has kind of reaffirmed that I need to carry on, reaching for my dream.
Absolutely.
And it's lovely. It's just to be able to inspire the future generation. And, going back to what we were saying earlier about how actually children grow up completely, there's kind of this clear slate, if you like, where, they think that the world is a fantastic place and they can be anything they want to be. But actually, and they look up to us as adults and then their environment for the answers. But then as we go through it, people around us are saying, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. And then they take that advice because they're still at that stage where they're looking for answers, and they think that they are the right answers when actually they're not. So we need to change the way we set examples for our future generations. And I just think it's lovely to be able to aspire to inspire others.
Well, that's beautiful. And, no barriers really, isn't it? So I never dreamed I would become a captain of a Boeing 747 and get my hands one day to fly Concorde supersonic. I only did it once. But what I was going to say was, wouldn't it be wonderful serendipity if, just like you're going to meet the nurse who looked after you, if in a few years' time, young Tim suddenly turns up on your doorstep or gets in touch, however he does, and he says, hey, you remember that time on the tube train?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. That would be amazing. I'd love to go to Tim's graduation. But it's just finding Tim, isn't it? It's, you meet some incredible people in your life. And
they could easily have seen you on the telly and gone, hey, isn't that girl we met on the tube train? So you never know.
Yes. Who knows? It's a very uncertain, unpredictable world. But what I can tell you is that, and within the healthcare field and beyond and outside the healthcare field, there is still, very much kindness out there. Yes. And I think we need to hold on to that. Really
we don't focus on it nearly enough. And so, Alexandra, we've been going nearly an hour, and it's been wonderful and a privilege to talk with you, and in particular to listen with you. And
you too, Trevor. Thank you.
Lost in admiration. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. My wife and I are blessed with 9 grandchildren now we're up to, and who knows what they will be. One of them certainly is a cadet with St. John's, so she's on the way.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, that's really, we're wishing them all the luck. But no, thank you so much, Trevor. It's been really lovely.
Your time is brilliant. And I wish you all the success in the world, Alexandra. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. All right.
Bye now.
Bye.
So that was a real pleasure speaking to Alexandra Adams, and I'm very grateful for Alexandra's time appearing as a guest on this episode 6 of Atrainability Radio. I'm sure that conversation will give you plenty to think about, particularly about the assumptions we all tend to make, me too, about people with some form of disability. So you can find the show notes for this episode of Atrainability Radio on our website, www.atrainability.co.uk. Just search for episode 6 with Alexandra Adams. And within those show notes, you can find useful links and other resources. Please do spread the word about us at Atrainability Radio. Tell a friend, tell several friends. And if you've not already done so, you can subscribe to these podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I've been and I remain Trevor Dale, and this has been Atrainability Radio.